Welcome grade 12s. Today we are still keeping on the topic of the human eye. However, aspects that we will be focusing on would be binocular vision and its importance, as well as changes in the eye when it comes to topics like accommodation and the pupillary mechanism. I hope you enjoy our video today. Binocular vision. Binocular vision. Mono means one, bi means two. What do we understand by binocular vision? Well, binocular vision means to see with two eyes. The images from the left eye and the images on the right eye, they are slightly different to one another. But when the two images join in the brain, it results in giving us stereoscopic vision. Let's look at our slide on binocular vision. Each eye forms its own image. So your left eye is giving you one image of the object in front of you, while your right eye is giving you a different image of the object in front of you. Look at this picture. So this is the view of my left eye. He is looking at this object this way, while the right eye is looking at the same object in a different way. So two different pictures are appearing, can you see? But together, a combination of the two is interpreted in the brain as this original image that we see here. So each eye forms its own image. Two separate images are formed. Why? Why do you think? Because our eyes are located in different positions on our faces. So because we have different images coming from both the eyes, we call that binocular vision of the same object, but we are getting two different images. So when these two images combine, it causes a three-dimensional or a 3D image. This is the 3D, three-dimensional or stereoscopic image, stereoscopic vision that is going to be interpreted in my cerebrum, and this is what we result in seeing. What is the reason? What is the function of us having this stereoscopic vision? What's the importance of us having stereoscopic vision? What is the significance of stereoscopic vision? Well, it helps us with determining the exact position of that object in a certain space and how far that object is actually from us. So it gives us the position of the object in the space as well as how far, more or less, this object is in front of us. Okay, someone with one eye will not have binocular vision because they are not getting the benefit of two eyes. They are not getting the benefit of getting two images from both eyes. So because they have only one eye, they will not have binocular vision. What they are seeing with that one eye is all that they see. Please remember that sometimes some people may have two working eyes, but they are not both able to focus on the same spot or area. Their depth perception is impaired or even absent, such as having crossed eyes or even somebody who has lazy eye. Or if one of the eyes are injured and has trouble seeing. For example, if you cover one eye and then try to pick up things, you'll probably find that it is not as quick and easy as doing it while using both our eyes. This is because your brain has to use other clues than stereoscopic vision or depth perception and is not used to doing this without the stereoscopic vision part. Please don't try doing this going down the stairs or something similar. Remember, someone with one eye will not have binocular vision. For example, let's look at our example in this picture. Here, the lady has one eye that's covered. Does she have binocular vision? Is she using two eyes to look at this image in front of her? No, she has one eye that's busy looking at what she's doing. Okay, so she's trying to pour some tea into this cup. She's getting vision only from one eye. Because she is not looking at it with both eyes, she is lacking something. She's lacking stereoscopic vision. She has no perception now of depth, size, neither does she have perception of distance. She doesn't have perception of how far the cup is in front of her. She has no perfect perception of the size of this object in front of her. So that is what she is lacking. And if somebody has binocular vision, they will have the benefit of looking at this object in 3D. They will be able to judge distance, depth, and the size of the object in front of them. Welcome back. Learners, have you ever focused on objects that are close to your eyes? For example, when you are reading a book? Or have you ever focused on objects that are far away, like your friend coming out of the school gate? Well, in order for us to look at objects close to our eye or far away, there needs to be some changes in our eyes. Our eyes need to adjust itself so that we are able to view these objects that are close to our eyes or far away. What is accommodating itself? What needs to adjust? It is the lens. The lens needs to change its shape so that we can look at objects close to our eye or far away. This is called accommodation. Accommodation is the ability of the lens to change its shape so that we can look at objects that are close to our eyes or objects that are far away. Let's find out how the lens is able to change its shape. How does the lens change its shape? To answer that, we need to look at figure A and figure B. Figure A and B are highlighting the front portion of our eye. How do we know it's the front portion? Very good. We see our lens. What is different between figure A lens and figure B lens? Yes, the shape is different. Can you see that figure A has a lens that's thin and long and narrow? And figure B has a lens that's more rounded and more fat and thick in the middle? Well, what happened? Our lens had the ability to change its shape. Okay, so what else do I understand? I understand that this is taking place in far or distant vision, meaning if I am looking at objects far away, then my lens behaves like this. It becomes thinner and longer. But when I am looking at objects close to my eye or near vision, what happens to my lens? The shape is much thicker in the middle and fatter. Wow! How did my lens change its shape? What caused or what brought about this change in the shape of my lenses? Two important parts play a role with the lens when it comes to the process of accommodation. What are those two important structures? They are the ciliary muscle and the suspensory ligaments. Let's look at our figure. So here's our lens. Behind the lens we have these long thread-like structures. Those are the suspensory ligaments. Holding the suspensory ligaments in place will be our ciliary muscle behind it. So here we have our ciliary muscle. In front of it will be the suspensory ligaments that's joined to the muscle or attached to the muscle. And then in front of the suspensory ligaments we get our lens. The suspensory ligaments are taking my lens and attaching it to the ciliary muscle. What is my suspensory ligaments doing? It is taking my lens and attaching it to my ciliary muscle. Now the ciliary muscle, being a muscle, has the ability to contract or relax. What do you think is happening to our ciliary muscle in figure A? Is our ciliary muscle contracting or is it relaxing? Yes, our ciliary muscles are relaxing. When the ciliary muscle relaxes, what's happening? It's pushing itself back to relax. And when it pushes itself back, what happens? It is pulling the suspensory ligaments back with it. And what's happening to the shape of the lens? The lens is becoming thinner and more narrow and longer. Can you see what happens during far or distant vision? Our ciliary muscles relax and moves backwards. The suspensory ligaments become more stretched, more tight, and the shape of the lens now becomes more longer and narrow and thinner because the lens is being pulled thin. Can you see that? Yes, and that is what happens when we are looking at objects far away or in the distance. What happens? 3 things occur. My ciliary muscle had to relax. My suspensory ligaments become pulled and tighter. And that brings about the change in the shape of my lens. My lens start to become more longer, thinner and narrower. If we look at objects in a near or close to my eye, and now my ciliary muscle contracts. And when my ciliary muscle contracts, it means it's going to be pushing itself closer to my lens. And when it pushes itself closer to my lens, what's going to happen to my suspensory ligaments? It's going to become looser because it's being pushed together. So the suspensory ligaments are becoming loose, and then that brings about a change in the shape of my lens. Now my lens, from being narrow, is now becoming more bulgy, more fatter in the middle and rounder. Right? What brought about the change in the shape of my lens? It was the contraction of my ciliary muscles that caused a change in my suspensory ligaments as well, making it more slackened, more looser, and then the shape of my lens became more rounded. Now, I want to introduce you to a word called convex. Convex just means more rounded. Which of the 2 figures has a more convex lens? Will it be figure A or will it be figure B? Yes, it's going to be figure B. Right. What does convex mean? It means more rounded. And when a lens is convex like this, more convex, it has the ability to bend the light or refract the light that's coming through. Okay? When do we get this kind of a situation where the lens is more convex and refraction occurs where the light has to bend for us to get a clear image on the yellow spot of our retina? When does this happen? It happens when we are looking at objects that are close or near to us. But when we look at objects in the distance, far away from our eyes, we notice that the lens is less convex. What do I mean less convex? It means that the lens shape is less rounded. And if it is less rounded, the light that's going to be coming through will be refracted less or bent less. So that we can now see the image that's far away very clearly. Okay? So very little bending of light is necessary for an image to appear on the yellow spot of our retina. That is in far or distant vision. But in close vision, what happens? The lens becomes more convex, more rounded. And then the more rounded the lens is, the more refraction or bending of light is going to occur for us to finally get that image appearing on the yellow spot of our retina. Now, let's explain accommodation. What do I ask myself? I ask myself, what happens to the ciliary muscle? What happens to the suspensory ligaments? What happens to the shape of my lens? Is the lens more convex? Meaning, is it more rounded? Does the light refract more or less? Let's begin. So if you look at figure A, we are highlighting what happens in far or distant vision. How does the lens accommodate itself? Step 1. Our ciliary muscles are going to relax. There is more pull on the suspensory ligaments, so they become tighter. The lens gets thinner in the middle. Light rays are not refracted that much. An image is formed at the back of the eye. Let's repeat. Accommodation in far or distant vision. Step 1. My ciliary muscles are going to relax. There is more pull on the suspensory ligaments, so they become tighter. The lens gets thinner and longer in the middle. Light rays are not refracted as much. Light rays are not going to be bent as much. And then an image is formed at the back of the eye. Now let's look at accommodation in close or near vision. What's going to happen now? Ask myself, what happens to the ciliary muscle? What happens to the suspensory ligaments? What happens to the shape of my lens? Is it more convex or less convex? And does the light refract more or does it refract less? Refract means to bend. Convex means more rounded. Let's discuss this. Okay, let's begin. In close or near vision, step 1. My ciliary muscles will start to contract. The suspensory ligaments are not stretched anymore, so they start to loosen or slacken. The lens gets fatter and more rounded, meaning more convex. Because the lens is more rounded, meaning more convex, the light rays are going to come and be refracted more. Refract means the light will be bent more. And then more light is going to enter the eye and is focused on the retina. Okay? So let's go over that one again. The ciliary muscles in close or near vision, my ciliary muscle is going to contract. My suspensory ligaments are going to become looser. They are not stretched, so they slacken. My lens become fatter and more rounded. The light rays coming through are going to be refracted or bent more. More light is going to enter the eye and going to be focused on the retina. That is accommodation. The pupillary reflex or the pupil reflex. As the name suggests, this process is going to involve which structure? Yes, the pupil. Can you remember what the pupil is? Yes, the pupil is the dark hole in the center of our eye. Let's look at our slide. This area here, the dark center, that represents your pupil of your eye. Now this pupil, can you see the difference in the size? This pupil is able to change from small to big and big to small. It has the ability to change its size. But when does it do that? Well, the pupil is able to change its size when it is exposed to different light intensities. For example, in a very bright light, what's going to happen to the size of our pupil? The size of our pupil is going to start becoming smaller. Why? So that a little bit of light can enter and not harm our retina in any way. But in dim light, the size of our pupil gets bigger. Why? To allow more light to enter so that we can search for the thing that we are looking for in the darkness. Okay? But what is helping our pupil to change its size? Well, if you look behind the pupil, you will notice there's an area here called the iris. The iris is the colored part of our eye and it contains muscles. There are two types of muscles in our iris. We have muscles that are running in a circle. Those are the circular muscles. And the iris also has muscles running longitudinally like this, which we call the radial muscles. So there's two types of muscles in the iris. We have the circular muscles and the radial muscles. Now those muscles of the iris help our pupil to change its size. So what is the function of our iris? It allows only a certain amount of light to enter into our eye so that we do not harm our retina in any way. Now the two types of muscles that we find in the iris, the radial and the circular muscles, they are known as antagonistic muscles. Antagonistic muscles are muscles that are working in opposition to one another. When one of them contracts, the other one will relax. When one is relaxing, the other one is contracting. So those two muscles, the circular and the radial, they are working in opposition to one another in order to bring about the change in the size of our pupil. Let's see what happens to our pupil in bright light. Now, when we are discussing the pupil reflex, we have to talk about what is happening to the circular muscles of our iris, what is happening to the radial muscles of the iris, and finally, what effect does it have on the size of the pupil. In dim light, we ask ourselves the same question. What happens to my circular muscles in my iris? What happens to my radial muscles in my iris? And how does it affect the size of my pupil in dim light? Okay, let's begin. In bright light, what happens? When you are exposed to bright light like this, what's going to happen? Very little light is going to be allowed to enter by our iris. Why? We don't want to harm our retina in any way. So what happens in bright light? For the pupil to become smaller, letting in less light, what happens to our circular muscles? Our circular muscles in our iris will contract. The longitudinal or the radial muscles will do the opposite and relax. What happens to the size of my pupil when my iris, circular muscles of my iris contracts and my radial muscles relax? Then it brings about a change in the size of my pupil. My pupil starts to constrict, meaning it starts to become smaller. And the smaller my pupil becomes, the less light is allowed to enter. In dim light, the opposite is going to happen. What will happen to my circular muscles now? My circular muscles in my iris will now relax, while my radial muscles do the opposite and contract. And when that happens, my pupil is going to dilate. Dilate means it's going to become larger, allowing much more light to enter into my eye. So that is what happens during pupillary reflex.